Welcome to the Talent Transformation Podcast. Today we are joined by Hannah Rebecchi. She is the Senior Manager of TA Technology at Wayfair, a big global e-commerce company. So Hannah, welcome. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Good. It's wonderful to have you here. I want to start by asking you a little bit about your experience coming into Wayfair. You know, it's an e-commerce company, right? So, did you come from another e-commerce company into that e-commerce company, or were you coming from a very different kind of environment?
So my journey before Wayfair, I was at Keurig Green Mountain Coffee Company. And then before that, I was actually with Apple for 6.5 years. So e-commerce was still somewhat new to me. My background had always been in HR, but not specifically in the TA tech space. So yeah, coming to Wayfair, the scale and the size of Wayfair was huge. E-commerce was new to me. And then the tech space in general was also new.
Right. So, well, coming from Apple, it's hard to say. I mean, it's such a big tech company, right? Did you find that Wayfair really approached technology differently than your previous employers?
To some extent, I didn't have as much of a view while I was at Apple. I was more in the field space. Apple, is very much homegrown in a lot of tools that they choose to use.
Yes.
Wayfair is very similar in that regard. At least the time that I joined. I've been with Wayfair for just over 5 years now. And we were very much if we can build it, let's try to build it first before we go to market. And so that wasn't necessarily new to me. I would say we've, definitely transitioned over the years that I've been with Wayfair and how we approach that build versus buy mentality.
Yeah, we've noticed that too with our customer base that, the big tech companies have often built their own systems. And that's interesting because they are less focused on sort of the verticals that the software industry has created, particularly in talent acquisition and talent management. And, they've had a different set of choices to make over the years. Do you think that the build themselves model has worked to their advantage or to their disadvantage over the past decade?
I think it served its purpose at its time. There were certain problems we were looking to solve. Some of them, we couldn't find tech in the market that was going to solve all our problems, which is why we bought it. Other ones we thought, we can probably replicate that. So let's try to do that in-house. I think the big difference you get with buying a software externally versus building it in-house is that long-term vision and that long-term roadmap. And it's not to say that we didn't have that with the homegrown tools, but when I look at some of the software that we've built, like the level of support that we have, the new releases, the features, keeping up with industry trends is much more common than, doing that right in-house is really hard and takes a certain level of dedication.
Yeah, I can see that. And I think that when we've replaced homegrown systems, it's usually not because they didn't have the functionality that they wanted. They actually did have the functionality they wanted. They just said, well, then came mobile, and then came Web 2.0, and then came AI, and we weren't responding quickly enough to all of those trends. So, eventually they decided that, if they could get everything they wanted, okay, and the system was, always being developed to be competitive in the market, that they would move away from their own solution. For us, that's usually the technology department that's actually doing the buy. But for our other customers, a lot of times they almost describe themselves as being trapped inside of technology that's developed by a company that has an objective which just doesn't actually align with their objective. I mean, have you run into that situation at all?
Absolutely. Or you outgrow it, right? It might have served its purpose at one point in your growth, and several years later, you're somewhere else. I mean, you're typically signing multi-year contracts. And I think that's, definitely we've experienced that in the past. I will caution, I think a common trap a lot of companies fall into in that you're looking at the technology that you have and it doesn't serve you anymore, and you see this shiny new thing, and to quickly jump to that shiny new thing and think this is going to solve all our problems. It's, it's going to make us more efficient. It's going to make our end users happier, our candidate NPS better, but it's not a silver bullet in most cases or in all cases. And so it's hard not to fall into that trap.
Yeah, well, I can imagine that. I mean, first of all, the software industry does produce its own hype for a reason, obviously.
Yeah.
And with so many different, new technologies coming out, and well, quite frankly, with so much venture money behind technology as well, it's a very well-funded hype machine. And I think it can be difficult for some of our customers to cut through that and sort of boil it down to, well, what really impacts our business? When you went into Wayfair, what did you find that was surprising to you? And what did you do that you think was most impactful?
Yeah, it's been a journey. I would say, coming in, I was really surprised to just learn more about the decisions of what we decided to build in-house versus what we decided to go to market and buy. And then further, looking at the mix of our HR tech stack, like we have a lot of tools. And so why do we have so many tools? Is there an opportunity to consolidate? That's been a journey that we've been on for the last several years. We've really made progress within the last 2 years of specifically for our TA tech stack, consolidating that. And so where we had a number of third-party vendors all doing separate things, a number of homegrown tools all doing separate things, we realized that there was a lot of inefficiencies that came with that. They at the time might have solved a specific problem and made us more efficient in that very niche area. But when we looked at it holistically, it wasn't making sense, and it was actually hurting us in a way, especially as we continued to scale the organization and scale the business. So coming into Wayfair and continuing to grow out our TA technology teams, the focus has really been, how do we bring back some of those efficiencies? How do we consolidate tools where it makes sense and have a really cohesive tech stack?
So, that's interesting. I mean, a lot of our customers have what they call technology sprawl, right? And it usually is sort of like, to figure out what technology is where, you almost have to be an archaeologist. How big was the company when we did that? And well, it only had that one office in that one country, so it did everything different. But now we have 35 countries, so now we do 35 things differently. And suddenly something that was interesting and different has become sort of a sprawled empire of its own that nobody knows how to manage. So how do you go to the user community, though, to address that problem? Because that's very much a problem that the tech organization sees, but sometimes individual users don't recognize that. They just have what they have, right? And you come along and say, well, we want to change that.
Yeah. And it's really hard to not fall into that really reactive mode and just say, we have the technology we know how to use it, we'll operate scrappy, because going through this huge transformation and the change management that comes along with it seems like a very daunting process. For us specifically, what led us on this journey was we were just getting over inundated as a tech team with requests and end users reaching out with their pain points and things that weren't working. And it felt like we were just, patching holes on a boat. And so when we finally stopped and said, we can't continue to operate this way, what needs to change or what needs to happen, we went to our end users internally, externally, both formal end user research and informal interviews. We looked at the industry and where it was going, and we got to this inflection point where we said, we can continue to operate scrappy with some of the tech that we have. The result of that is not sustainable for the business. We're going to have to hire, X more recruiters or X more, hiring managers to support, and started to build that business case of what would need to change and what do we want to change, which then led us to going to market for new technology. But it was a journey.
Yeah. It's really a question of evolution, right? I mean, how do you evolve when you have so many different systems that are designed so differently from each other, and you want to actually create something new? And your first question is, well, where do you create that, right? Is it in this system? Is it in that system? And it just gets increasingly more difficult to sort of plot out that future model, right? But that's tough because tech is saying now that their most important objective is to have continuously improving systems. I'm not sure the vendor community has fully figured out how to do that, right? So how do you decide what kind of products you want to bring into the organization? What's the benchmarks that you use, and what are the high level objectives that must be met in order to make something part of that tech stack?
So where we even begin to tackle that is trying to figure out what is our future vision and our future roadmap, starting with our end users. We want to focus on, sure, what are the pain points you're feeling today, but almost more importantly is like, where do you want to go? Pretend those pain points don't exist. We can identify those, but where do you want to go, and help us understand what that looks like, overlaying that with industry trends, what's our target demographic, and using that as a vision of then filling the gaps, saying, okay, well, we know where we want to go, so then what's stopping us right now, and using that as a benchmark. When we do go to market for other technology to help fill those gaps, it's a process of really fine-tuning what are our core requirements, what are critical items that we need to have, what are nice to have items, and then, going to market. It's a crowded HR tech market out there.
Yeah.
And so cutting through all of that noise can be challenging. So having a really rock solid understanding of what does your business need, what do they want, not just today, but, in 5 years from now, which can be hard to understand. That's really kind of where you need to start in order to navigate your way through the tech market.
How much do you advise them about what's happening in the future in technology? And, they can come to you and say, well, this is what I want in the future. And you can say, okay, fine, I'll run off and get that for you. But do you stop and say to them, well, hold on a minute, this is what we think's happening in the future, and you need to think about that and maybe change your vision a little bit?
I'd say the biggest opportunity or area we see to have that influence is really helping the business think about scale. We're an organization that's continuing to grow, and we've grown pretty rapidly over the last several years. And for our stakeholders and our end user in the business, it's hard for them to sometimes say, well, is this actually going to scale with us in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years? So I'd say that's the first area we really focus on anything that they're bringing to us, to say, well, have you thought about what this is going to look like when you are processing, 10,000 new hires, 20, 100,000 new hires? And then I'd say the other area is, what are we seeing in the market? Is it going to be outdated in a year? Should they start looking at chatbot functionality today for the career site, or for how someone applies, or for our employees, things they're not thinking about that they rightfully probably shouldn't be, because it's not in their landscape. That's our specialty. So just making them aware of that and trying to gauge their interest is where we would start.
What do you see yourself as then? I mean, do you see yourself more as a business person or a technologist? How are you defining you in this scenario?
Technologist, in a way. So we're very fortunate at Wayfair where my team handles the technology. We have a process team that can help guide us with some of those more business process related type questions, what they should be doing, what the business should be doing, and we can help inform like how they can be doing that.
Okay. And is that getting more difficult or easier over time?
Somewhere in the middle.
Somewhere in the middle. Okay.
Is that fair?
I'll take that.
I think it's helpful having those defined roles. I think in a lot of organizations you have this team or this person who has to play both of those roles, and it's really challenging. And I think having these defined roles, I mean, we're working so closely with this partner team of ours, but having this clear defined roles of like, let's really understand what the business wants without being too drawn or too influenced by the technology, and then almost see it as a wish list. And then let's, consult with the technology partners to say, well, this is what we want. You tell us how it's possible.
How much do you think about it in terms of product design? Do you think that you're designing an experience for these people and that you're sort of assembling these different technologies to do that? Or do you see yourself more as a pure technologist buying technology to serve whatever that technology says it's supposed to serve?
We definitely follow a lot of the design principles as far as defining who our user personas are, what are the experiences we want. And I think you have to in order to be successful, or you're going to fall into that trap of just, continuing to jump to the next shiny technology or the next shiny object. So those design principles are key.
Do you think that's easier because you're in a company like Wayfair, which
Yes.
is, in the
Yeah.
business of making people use technology, right?
Mhm.
So you don't have to go to your executive management in Wayfair and say, we need a great candidate experience. They immediately get that,
Yeah.
right? So do you never have to sell up in that scenario, or you just feel like you're very supported because of what you do? What's that feeling like?
I definitely supported. I mean, yeah, Wayfair is a tech company, so they get it to some extent. Again, I think really cutting through the noise of the tech industry. I mean, when we went to market for a new tech stack for our high volume population, we market mapped over 30 different vendors. And so, really boiling that down to the top 4 and then proving that business case, and then to the bottom 2, and then to our final winner, really proving that business case of the time that it took. I mean, that was a year-long journey, and that's individuals, employees' capacity that are spent working on doing that research, where they could be, doing something else internally that maybe stakeholders would see being more productive. And so really proving out that business case is important regardless of, being in a big tech company that gets it or not.
Yeah. We estimate, I mean, we don't know, but we think that our customers spend at least $250,000 just to make the decision of what product to buy. When you add in all the time that they spend bringing in resources that are, even if they're billable or not billable, it's the same thing. It still has a cost to the company. And I think that the challenge sometimes they have is that they don't do this very frequently, right? So you bring in a lot of business people to change a system, and that system's been in place for 7 years already, or 10 years, right? And so they're going to get involved in this particular process, and then they're going to go back and hopefully not get involved again for another 5 years, right? How do you bring people into the process that are influential stakeholders, and sort of get them in and get them out in a productive way?
Defining roles. I think also documentation, which I know is very vague and high level, but how many times have you been evaluating your processes or technology and you're like, why did we make that decision? Like, why is that the process we follow today? And they're like, well, so-and-so 3 years ago was driving. And you're like, well, they're no longer with the company. Like, we've never revisited this. So this doesn't make sense. And so clear documentation of like, what are the decisions we're making and why are we making them? What's the impact that it's having? And then clear role ownership, right? Like getting them into the project and getting them out of the project. It's usually for a finite period of time. And so you really need to establish like, what are you doing versus what am I doing? And at the end of the day, like who is the key decision maker? So things just don't, like things can continue to go on forever if you don't define those.
And they do in some places,
Yeah.
right? We know this. What would you do differently if you came back into Wayfair now?
Probably start this journey earlier. I mean, hindsight's 2020, but yeah, when I look at the tech stack at the time, like sure, it served a purpose, but I think if we had this more visionary approach, maybe we could have gotten to where we are today. Not to say this is like the end state and we're doing everything right by any means, but really questioning like, do we need all the technology that we have? Meaning, do we need so many different types of technology? Is that technology serving its purpose? Trying to evaluate that earlier. I think for a period of time, we were very reactive in the technology is working for us. So let's just continue to roll with it versus taking the time to actually pause and say, like, what's our vision? What's our future? Where do we want to go? Before waiting to say, well, the business is continuing to scale, like keep up or get out in a way.
Yeah. And Wayfair's been a high growth company, right? So certainly when you're in a high growth company, you kind of think, well, you've got to rush, right, to just get the next thing done. But it's interesting that you'd go back to say the vision, because I think sometimes companies underestimate the value of that vision, right? And it's hard to get everybody to row in the same direction without it, right? When you did sort of define the vision, was that a difficult process?
Absolutely. I think you're constantly battling with, should this vision be internally focused? Are your end users that you're solving for, are they your employees? Or is your end user, candidates, customers? And so you're pitching your vision internally. So rightfully so, they're like, "Oh, what about us? What about the employees?" When we think about what our vision in the HR tech space is, it's, to be a place that employees, future employees of Wayfair, call home. And so we want an exceptional candidate experience. It's not that we don't want an exceptional employee experience, but in our view, the candidate comes first. And so solving for that, I think, is a hard pill to swallow sometimes when it feels like, oh, well, are you putting the employee second? So yeah, it was definitely challenging to get everyone on board.
Yeah, but you did it.
Yes.
And that's good. That's great. And Wayfair is growing, and it's a big player in the world. Do you think that what you've learned in talent acquisition is applicable in some other areas of HR?
I'm sure. When we think about our HR technology, we do still very much have it bundled in a way where it's talent acquisition, our HRS for like our employee data. We have our employee resource center that's using different technologies. So where we feel like within TA, we have a very cohesive platform finally. I wouldn't say that we've gone on that journey or necessarily made that cohesiveness happen across all of HR. So there's definitely an opportunity there.
Well, it was a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you.
Good luck with the next growth phase at Wayfair, which is probably underway as we're speaking right now.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And yeah, it's wonderful chatting with you. I'd love to have you back to talk to us again about some more things.
Been a pleasure.